Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. These are two people. Then he goes on, the place known as the King's Mountain was destroyed on account of a rooster and a hen. We're not going to go into that story today. The city of Beta was destroyed on account of a shaft from a chariot. Okay, now we go to the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. There was a man whose friend was Kamsa, and he had an enemy who was Bar Kamsa. Now Bar usually means son. So was this a father and a son? We'll discuss that later. But anyhow, there were two people. His friend was Kamsa, and his enemy was Bar Kamsa. And he once made a feast and said to his servant, "Go bring me my friend Kamsa." And the servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy, Bar Kamsa. Very easy to confuse the two names. They're very similar. So now, the man who was hosting the feast came and found his enemy, Bar Kamsa, sitting at the feast. And he said to him, that man, he wouldn't even address him directly. He says, that man is the enemy of that man. In other words, you are my enemy. So what then do you want here? What are you doing here? Get up and leave. He ousted him. He threw him out of the banquet. But the man was embarrassed, of course. Bar Kamsa said to him, since I already came, let me stay and I'll give you money for whatever I eat and drink. I'll pay for my food. Don't embarrass me. The host said to him, no, get out. And Bar Kamsa said, I'll give you money for half of the feast. I'll pay for half of the banquet. And he says, no, I'll pay you for the entire feast. And again, no. And then he took him by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. He threw him out of the party. When Bar Kamsa realized this, he said to himself, since the sages were sitting there and did not protest, they saw how I was humiliated and they didn't say anything. So from that I can derive that they were happy, that they agreed with what he did. So I will go and inform against them to the king. I'll go to Rome. You know, Israel then was under Roman domination, and there was a lot of tension between Israel and Rome at that time. So this was going to be a way to get even with those Jews. He himself was a Jew, but he was going to get even with them, with the Jewish leaders. And what is he going to do? And he went and he said to the emperor, the Jews have rebelled against you. Now, in the Jewish community, there were two factions. There were many factions, but two general factions. One faction was against Rome and wanted to get independence from Rome and were willing to fight. And another faction wanted to work things out with Rome. So they shouldn't be forced to engage in a terrible battle, which ultimately did happen and ultimately cost the lives of close to 2 million Jews. So the emperor said to him, to Bar Kamsa, who says? Now he wasn't going to just accept, some malcontent complaining that the Jews are willing to rebel. The king knew that there was a faction that was trying to rebel, but he knew there was another faction that was not interested in that. So he said, go and test them. Send them an offering and see whether they will sacrifice it. You see, in the days of the temple, it was customary for the leaders of the countries, whether it was the Persians or the Greeks or the Romans, they would send animals to be offered as sacrifices on their behalf. It was a sign that we were praying for the welfare of the government. Interestingly, that's one of the things that when the first temple was destroyed, the prophet was told, and he repeated this to the people, pray for the welfare of the government. Don't be rebellious against the government that dominates over you. And this was a way of showing that you respect the authority of the government by offering their animals as sacrifices on their behalf, on the behalf of the emperor and the government. So send them. And the Romans loved that. The Romans loved when the Jews offered sacrifices in the temple for them. So send them an offering, an animal, to be brought in honor of the government, and see whether they'll sacrifices. So the emperor went and sent with him a 3-year-old calf. So there's a dispute what it really means, 3 years old or a very special, very good animal, a fat animal that was worthy of an emperor. While Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the upper lip, and some say he made the blemish on its eyelids. Now, according to Jewish law, you cannot offer a blemished animal as a sacrifice. But that law does not apply to sacrifices that were brought outside of the temple. And the Romans didn't consider that to be enough of a blemish to disqualify it. So he was very clever that he made this blemish in a place where you couldn't really notice it. So according to them, to their rules, it's not a blemish. For them, a blemish would be it's missing a limb or something like that, something that's really visible. So here you're coming to the temple with this animal, a blemished animal. Jewish law says you can't offer it. But if you don't offer it, Bar Kamsa is going to go back to the emperor. He probably came with a soldier or two, and report that the Jews refused to offer the sacrifice. That would be a sign that a rebellion is brewing, because up until this time they always did offer the sacrifices of the Romans. So the rabbis who were in charge of the temple, you see the temple was under the control of the Sadducees, who were not really interested in the temple itself. To them it was a source of money, source of power. But they knew they didn't know the laws, so they had the rabbis in charge of supervising that all the services in the temple should be done properly. So here the sages, the rabbis, thought to sacrifice the animal due to maintaining peace with the government. Because they knew if they don't sacrifice it, this will unleash the Romans against the Jews. And who knows what will happen? Many lives will be lost, which is what happened. So we know that saving a life takes precedence over virtually every law in Judaism, with some exceptions, which we won't go into right now. But this is not one of the exceptions. So the rabbi said, let's sacrifice it. And that way we'll spare a rebellion against Rome, and Rome will not destroy us. One rabbi, whose name was Zechariah ben Avkulas, he said, no. If they do that, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed on the altar. It's going to destroy the integrity of Jewish law. People won't know all the details. We can't tell people why we did this. This is top secret, of course. You don't want people to know what's going on with the issues with Rome and Israel. So people are going to hear that we offered a blemished animal. The word will get out. And that will destroy the integrity of Jewish law. So then they thought to kill him, to kill Bar Kamsa, so that he would not go and speak against them. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, no, you can't do that either. If you kill him, they'll say that if you make a blemish on an animal, a sacrificial animal, you deserve the death penalty. And that's not a capital crime. It's against the Jewish law to offer a sacrifice that was blemished, but it's not worthy of a death penalty. And people will the word will go out, we killed the man who offered a sacrifice that was blemished. And that's going to cause people to misconstrue Jewish law. So what they did is they didn't do anything. They let him get away with it, that he could report to the emperor that the Jews refused to offer the sacrifice. Rabbi Yochanan says, the humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land. So they're putting all the blame on this one rabbi at the end. This is a beautiful point, that the Talmud doesn't hide its criticism of its own people. Rabbi Yochanan was the leading sage in Israel about a century later after this happened, a little over a century later. And he's saying that this leading rabbi, Rabbi Zechariah was a leading rabbi at that time, he's the cause of the destruction of the temple. Okay, this is the story. So let's analyze how many people did things wrong here. We'll go through them. Kamsa, he doesn't even show up to the party. Remember the story that the man is throwing this banquet. He asks his attendant, go invite Kamsa, my good friend. But by mistake, he invites Bar Kamsa, his enemy. Kamsa was not even there. So why is he blamed? Kamsa, it says, because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the temple was destroyed. But Kamsa wasn't there. He had nothing to do with this whole thing. So the simple explanation is, it means because of the confusion between Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, such a small little matter, it's almost identical, but look what had happened from such a small mistake. But there are others who say, no, Kamsa is a culprit. One interpretation says that Kamsa was the father of Bar Kamsa. Now imagine this. You have a son, you have a friend, your best friend, who's the worst enemy of your son. And it's all right with you? You're comfortable with that? How could a father be comfortable knowing that his son is hated by his friend? Something is wrong over there. There was such division, such hatred, that a father didn't care that his son was involved in a dispute with his best friend, and he did nothing to try to reduce the hatred. In other words, hatred was so institutionalized, and you know what? We see that today also. I remember speaking to a woman, she just passed away not too long ago. This is in Florida. She was a woman in her mid-80s. She was a retired professor. She had one daughter. That's it. That was her whole family. The daughter discovered, or maybe she didn't have to discover it, but the mother told her that she voted, I'm not going to mention any names, she voted for a certain candidate. The daughter refused to have anything to do with her mother. This poor mother, living alone, having no one in her life but her own daughter, but she refused to have anything to do with her because she had a difference, a political difference. That's what happened over here. The political differences were so stark, were so extreme, that it was accepted that I don't talk to my father, I don't talk to my mother, to my child. I could have my best friend and my son could be his biggest enemy. It doesn't bother me. That's normal. That's part of life. If that's what we're come to right now, we're in big trouble. Then when I came back, I was visiting Florida. When I heard the story, I had a class, and I told the story to that class, and a woman said to me, you know what? I told my mother that I was considering voting for that candidate, and I didn't, and she won't talk to me. This is the type of incredibly evil hatred that exists in our society today because of political reasons. Your politics is not God. Keep your politics out of your family life. Keep it out of your relationships. Okay, so Kamsa seems to be a little bit of a culprit. He's a little bit responsible because he is involved indirectly by not doing anything to correct the problem. Bar Kamsa, Bar Kamsa, we certainly could see that he is guilty. He's the guy who goes to the Romans against his own people, going against his own people, endangering his own people, subjecting them to such massacres. Unbelievable. It was the greatest massacre of Jews in all of Jewish history until the Holocaust. Close to 2 million Jews were murdered, and many others were sent into slavery. It was the worst possible atrocities that can be committed against children, husbands, wives, and children. It was terrible. That was all caused by this one Bar Kamsa. He was an evil man, there's no question about it. But also the messenger messed up. The messenger made a mistake, and he invited the wrong person. Should he get some blame? Well, it's an innocent mistake. I mean, people make mistakes, but that's exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said before. You should always be concerned that a little gesture, a little mistake can mushroom into something much bigger. So while he's not a culprit, he's not an evil person, he didn't do anything evil, didn't show that he had some hatred, but he wasn't careful. And when you're living in such times when there's so much division amongst people, you have to be very careful. You have to walk on eggshells, not to do anything wrong, which is a lesson that living in times like those, and maybe times like these, you have to be very careful. The host, isn't he a culprit also? Throws the guy out, embarrasses him in public, wouldn't even take the payment for the entire banquet. There's another version in the Midrash that says that he actually offered him double the cost of the banquet, and he still refused. So you could say he was a very wealthy man. He didn't need his money. But still, to embarrass him in public, that's a horrible thing. The rabbis didn't protest. They see an injustice being done, they should have protested. So therefore, the rabbis are certainly accomplices. They're involved in what happened. The Talmud says that Rabbi Zechariah caused it because he wouldn't give a decision one way or another. He wouldn't say either to offer the sacrifice or to kill Bar Kamsa. By the way, they had every right to kill Bar Kamsa. And in fact, most commentators say that that's what they should have done. Because Bar Kamsa was what they call in Hebrew, in the Talmudic jargon, a rodev, which means a pursuer. If you see someone, the Talmud describes this scenario, you see someone with a gun, although those days they didn't have guns, they used other weapons. You see someone with a sword running after a person saying, I'm going to kill you. What do you do, a bystander? What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to kill the person who's threatening to kill an innocent person. If you could disarm him, fine. If you can't, you kill him. Why? Because he's a threat to an innocent life. Well, this man was a threat to not just one life, but to millions of lives. So they had an obligation to kill him, and the rabbi just hesitated. He didn't give any definitive response. So he's also a culprit. What about the emperor? You can't get him off the hook. He's the one who actually unleashed his legions to destroy the temple and massacre the Jews. So you have 7 different parties over here. Who would you say is the most guilty? Well, it would seem, since the Talmud says because of Bar Kamsa, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, that he would be the most. For a Jew to go against his own people to the extent that he did because he was embarrassed, that seems to be a real sign of how deplorably evil he was. I would agree with that. But my question here is, why isn't the host mentioned by name? The Talmud doesn't hesitate to identify the guy called Bar Kamsa. We know who his name goes down in history forever. We're always going to blame him for all our problems. But wouldn't you say that the host is at least partially responsible for embarrassing him, throwing him out? Why isn't his name mentioned? Why doesn't he get any credit, any blame for what happened? We just know he's the host, the rich man who throws a banquet. Yes?
So, I have a question. Why did Bar Kamsa go? If this man is the host, he knew who was throwing the party.
Okay, good question. Very good question. Why did he go? He knew his enemy is throwing the party. So some commentators say, he was convinced that the man was trying to reconcile. Yes. He was trying to reconcile. You get an invitation from your biggest enemy, someone who hates you, to this very prominent banquet where all the dignitaries will be present. Well, the man wants to make up with me. So that's...
And he was good friends of the father.
And it was good friends of the father. So he thought, maybe my father did work something out, and maybe now he's reconciling and he's allowing me to come to his banquet. So that's why he came. The fact that he threw him out, I just want to add something before I go back to why the host is not mentioned. The fact that he threw him out points to something. The Talmud says that the temple was destroyed, not here, in another tractate. Temple was destroyed because of one sin, primarily. What was that sin? Sinat chinam, senseless hatred. What does that mean, senseless hatred? If someone punches you in the nose and you hate him, Would you call that senseless hatred? No. It doesn't make it right, but it's justified. It's not senseless. Someone hurt you, you hurt them back. You hate them.
Voted for the wrong person. Senseless.
Right. So if someone does something to harm you, someone undermines you, someone steals money from you, and you hate them, as bad as it is, you can't call it senseless. Senseless sounds like it means you just hate someone. Why do you hate the person? I don't know why. I just hate them. I just can't stand their guts. That's what senseless means. But that's not necessarily the only kind of hatred, because every hatred has some reason behind it. You think the other person is a threat to you, the other person is competing with you and taking away your business. You'll always find some reason why you hate that person. So what does senseless hatred mean? That you hate them in a totally irrational way. If someone does something to harm you and you harm them back, tit for tat, it's bad, it's not right, it's revenge, and we're not allowed to take revenge, but it's within reason. But when the hatred becomes so deep that nothing could get you to change your attitude, that's what we mean by senseless. It means it touches the very core of the person. There's a story in the Talmud. The Talmud describes why Moses' brother Aaron was so beloved, because he always made peace between people. How did he make peace between people? He would go to one enemy and he would tell them, I just spoke to your adversary and he told me that he's sorry and he thinks you're great and he loves you, he cares about you. Then he would run to the other guy before they met and tell him the same story. And when they met, they were good friends. What does that mean? That means, did Aaron lie? No, he didn't lie. Because if they really hated each other, they hated each other's guts, and it hit to their very core and essence, the lie wouldn't help. It's not going to help. I mean, I'm going to give you a very radical illustration, but if Eichmann, may his name be obliterated, would say he wants to make friends with the Jews because he thinks Jews are great and he's going to start working for the Jewish community, would that change our attitude towards him? No, it won't. Why? Because the hatred there is justifiably fundamental to our very core when you're dealing with such evil. So when someone is able to make peace with someone else, that proves that in their core, there's no hatred. The hatred is only superficial. So that's what I'm trying to point out over here. In this case, here, Bar Kamsa comes to the party, so he's ready to reconcile, and the host doesn't faze the host. The host still maintains the same hatred. It didn't change his attitude. If you see your enemy coming to your simcha, to your celebration, a normal person would say, you know what? They're trying to honor me. They're trying to reconcile. And that would immediately take off some of the rough edges of the hatred, and you would be able to reconcile. But here, it didn't work. That showed that this was senseless hatred. The hatred went way beyond whatever political or religious or familial tension there that existed. This touched their very core and essence, and that's senseless. Senseless doesn't mean that it doesn't have a reason. It means that as well, but it means that the hatred is deeply rooted. It's not just on the surface or some layers on the surface. It really touches the very inner part of the person. Yes?
So what is the reason now? Hates between people now?
I'm afraid that some of it is senseless, yes. They may have good reasons why they hate, but the hatred goes beyond the reasons. It's not something that you could just easily reconcile. Yes, you want to go?
I just told the culpability of the host servant for fetching the wrong Kamsa. Is that
I'm sorry, I didn't.
the culpability of the servant that the host sent?
Yeah.
For fetching the host the wrong
The servant, yeah.
Does that lend to the phrase, don't blame the messenger?
Yeah. The question was the fact that the messenger messed everything up. Does that brought about the phrase, don't blame the messenger? Because he's not being blamed. No one says anything about the messenger. It may very well be. he should be blamed, but he didn't have any intention of doing anything wrong. He was just sloppy. But sloppy sometimes could be dangerous. But you can't, there's no malice in what he did. The malice is in Bar Kamsa, the host, yes?
So could he have had ulterior motive?
Who, the attendant? Oh, that's an interesting question. Could he have had ulterior motives? Maybe he wanted to make peace. He was the peacemaker. So he says, you know what, I'm going to invite the wrong person, and let's see how this works out. That could be. We don't know any more details than what we have in front of us. So that might be a very good possibility.
So is this really an actuality, or was it just a story?
Oh no, this is a true story. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of information that we don't have. In fact, there are historians who claim that the Josephus writes that there were two people. He names one person. Kamsa, son of Kamsus, was a prominent leader who pushed for the Jewish community to profess allegiance to Rome. Sounds similar to Kamsa, Kamsus. So that's what some historians claim. Of course, we can't know for sure. And they claim that Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas is likely another Rabbi Zechariah that Josephus mentions, son of Amphikalus, who was a leading zealot who wished to rebel against Rome, as recorded by Josephus. So this is an interesting theory, that what happened at this banquet, you had two major factions that I said before. There was one faction that says, let's fight Rome. And the Talmud later on will explain that when the people who didn't want to fight Rome prevailed, what they did is they forced the Jews into fighting. How so? They destroyed all the supplies, food, fuel, that they had stored for 21 years. See, the Romans were besieging Jerusalem, I think it was for 2 years, and they were ready to give up. Jerusalem was so well fortified that the Romans could not penetrate the walls and defeat the Jews. But the zealot says, let's not rely on our defenses, let's fight the Romans. And that, of course, was an ill-fated approach, because the Jews were desperate now. They were starving. There was mass starvation in Jerusalem, and the Romans finally broke through the walls. But anyhow, some people suggest, and this is a theory, it's conjecture, that this banquet was a banquet of people who wanted to fight the Romans, the zealots. And Bar Kamsa was one of the people who wanted to accommodate the Romans, make an accommodation with them. Because see, he was friendly with the Romans. If I come to Rome and I said, I would like to speak to the emperor because I have some information from him, you don't get in to see the emperor so easily. He must have had some very good relationships with the Roman officials. So that this dispute between Bar Kamsa and the people at the banquet had to do with a political situation. It's a theory, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying it's right. And that's why this guy, the host, he liked Kamsa, because Kamsa, whether he's a father or someone else, he was on their side. He was a zealot. But Bar Kamsa was a peacenik, and he was very friendly with Rome, and that's why they threw him out. And the rabbis felt that they were justified in throwing him out. That's why they didn't protest. They didn't protest because they felt that this man is going to get us destroyed by Rome, because Rome was taking over more and more, and that would undermine everything that the Jewish people stood for. In the end, the peaceniks prevailed. Bar Kamsa was right to make an accommodation with Rome. The leading rabbi of that time, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, got himself smuggled out of Jerusalem, and he met Vespasian, the Roman general who became the Roman emperor, and he impressed him. It's a whole story which I won't go into. And the Vespasian said, "I'll give you anything you ask for." And the Talmud says he foolishly didn't ask for Jerusalem or the temple. He asked for smaller things, but some say that the smaller things were really what kept the Jewish people alive, which I won't go into it right now. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was against fighting the Romans, and he had to be smuggled out of Jerusalem. How could he be smuggled out? The zealots wouldn't let him out, because they knew if he would go out, he would try to work with the Romans. So what did they do? They had to say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai died. And you don't bury people in Jerusalem. People are buried outside of Jerusalem. So when they came to the gates to get him outside, the zealots saw a coffin with Rabbi Yochanan in it. It wasn't a coffin, it was a bier. And they said, he's dead? We don't trust them. Let's stab him to see if he's really dead. And the students who were carrying him said, you know what the Romans are going to say? That the Jews killed their own rabbi. So they let him go. And he met Vespasian, and he made some accommodation with the Romans that they should not destroy the city of Yavne, where all the sages were exiled. They shouldn't destroy the family of the leaders, the leadership, the descendants of Hillel. And they should find a doctor to cure a Rabbi Tzadok who had been fasting for 40 years, not eating anything during the day, obviously, but eating at night. And he was very ill, and they needed a doctor. So those are the three things he asked for. So getting back again to the historical perspective, that this banquet was a banquet of zealots versus the people who wanted to find accommodation. And the rabbis felt justified in killing, in throwing Bar Kamsa out, because they felt Bar Kamsa was not loyal to the Jewish people. Whether that's true or not, yes.
Remember when Abraham went out and invited Isaac to his
Yes.
tent? I mean, this whole scene was going against that by throwing out a guest.
Well, if you think that the guest was as evil as Bar Kamsa turned out to be, whatever theory you want to say about the political side of it, he was an evil man. And they knew he was evil, and we know that he's evil based on what he did, but they already knew about him, that he was an evil man. He would report to the Romans against the Jews, so they felt it was justified to throw him out. If someone would walk into this room right now who was Jewish, but was aligning himself with the neo-Nazis to kill Jews, would you say, well, maybe I would say, welcome, come in here, maybe we can change him, turn him around. But if I could understand why they might throw him out and feel that it was justified. Yeah.
So you're saying that Bar Kamsa was really looking for peace with the Romans?
Bar Kamsa was looking for peace with the Romans at the expense of the Jewish people.
Oh, at the expense?
Probably that he was too close, too chummy with the Romans. See,
The others wanted to fight.
they were wrong also.
No, okay, so he was actually doing their bidding by creating this situation.
Oh yes, yeah, that's what happens. Evil people, they could be fighting for a cause that's evil and create the opposite of what they claim that they were trying to accomplish.
So as a result, the people in the banquet got what they wanted, but the result was not what they wanted.
Right, that's right. We did fight the Romans. We were forced into it, and we were not.
But we wanted to fight them.
Some of us.
Like that whole group you said was.
That group, yes, that's the assumption that group were those who were the zealots who wanted to fight the Romans. We don't have any evidence that that's the case. The Talmud doesn't give us any more information, but that's a theory that some historians try to apply. One thing we know for sure, that the rabbis didn't just throw him out because they didn't care. Because that goes against everything that these rabbis, whose names are not mentioned, although Rabbi Zechariah was one of them, the Midrash says. So we knew that these were people who believed in not embarrassing people in public. The Talmud says when you embarrass someone in public, it's like bloodshed. So these people wouldn't be guilty of bloodshed, but they probably felt that this man was a dangerous person, he was an evil person, which we know is true, and they felt that he had no place in that banquet. Now, why are we blaming Rabbi Zechariah? he generally didn't, he felt it was a mistake on his part that we can't offer the sacrifice, because people will say that you can offer a blemished sacrifice, and you can't kill Bar Kamsa because people will say you can kill a person for blemishing a sacrifice, offering a blemished sacrifice. He was wrong, but why is he blamed? Because this is how some commentators explain. This rabbi, Zechariah, was too humble, which meant that he didn't feel he had the authority to issue a definitive ruling. He was wishy-washy, based on humility. And humility sometimes could be deadly. If a person has the ability to stand up and take a stand and make a decision that will save lives, and he says, who am I to make this decision? I'm a nobody. Yes, he was a humble man, but when you're dealing with life and death or any other very serious situation, you can't diminish your own importance and not rule accordingly. It was the fact that he was incapable of issuing a definitive decision. There's one other place in the Talmud where there's a dispute between the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai about something. One says it's forbidden to do it this way, one says no, you can do it the other way, and he gives a decision saying, I'm not going to get into the dispute, just avoid that situation, which is a way of saying, I don't want to take responsibility for a decision. Let others more talented than me, more wise than me, issue decisions. I'm going to try to get out of having to give a decision. And the fact that he was a leading rabbi and he had that humility and he didn't want to take responsibility, that's a deadly thing. That's a message to leadership. So who is guilty? Bar Kamsa, there's not any question, is the most guilty party. Rabbi Zechariah was guilty of lack of leadership, even though he certainly did not want to harm anybody, and he didn't make any decision based on malice or anything that was evil. But the fact that he didn't have this power of leadership, he was wishy-washy, that is a dangerous thing in a time of crisis. You always need leaders who are willing to take a stand, even if it's an unpopular stand. To say to kill Bar Kamsa was not very popular and fraught with some danger as well. But he should have taken a stand one way or another, yes.
When you look at the emperor, okay, he was the one that made the final decision to act. And he was questioning that action initially.
Right.
Because of his reaction.
Well, Rome didn't want trouble. Rome didn't want to start fights just for the sake of starting fights. They had to be convinced that there's a real rebellion brewing.
So, did he feel that, was this test sufficient to really measure whether they should attack?
No. Obviously, there were other things that happened later, but this was the first thing that sparked the Roman reaction to the Jewish people's desire to be independent. So it's obviously there were other things that happened as well. And the Talmud later on talks about how in their superstitious ways they shot arrows in different directions and they all landed in the direction of Jerusalem. So they took that as a sign that we're going to be successful. They were afraid. They were afraid to start up with the Jews.
Okay, so if they were afraid, and this all happened, aren't we putting then, there's reason to put emphasis on this story, but to put that much emphasis on it, when really Rome was really questioning whether they really wanted to.
So why are we putting so much emphasis on this story is the question. And the answer is, the rabbis of the Talmud were not interested in geopolitical considerations between Rome and Israel. That's not the interest. The interest is, what does it mean to us? How do we correct what was done wrong? In order to correct what was done wrong, we have to identify what was wrong. And the Talmud identifies it as senseless hatred. There was such deep-rooted hatred that was the catalyst that led to the events that ultimately brought about the destruction of the temple. So the lesson is that we have to concentrate on getting rid of senseless hatred. And the Rabbi would always say, the way to get rid of senseless hatred is through senseless love. What does senseless love mean? If you love someone because they're nice to you, if you love someone because they benefit you, that's sensible love. That makes sense. That's normal. You look in the mirror, you see a reflection. That's how King Solomon describes the way one person who shows love to another, that person will reciprocate the love. But that's not senseless love. That's love is based on logic, which is very good and fine and something to encourage. But we have to go deeper than that the love should reach our core, that even if the person doesn't deserve our love based on their behavior, the love is still there. That's the remedy to senseless hatred. Yes?
So, it's interesting for me. What is roles, I'm sorry for this question maybe, what is the role of rabbis in our life?
What is the role of rabbis?
Yes, what does it mean? I thought rabbi is teacher, yes?
That's one of his jobs, yes.
One of this. Can be rabbi be judge?
Rabbis traditionally were first and foremost judges. That's what rabbis always were throughout Jewish history. They were judges of Jewish law. Some of them were experts in ritual matters, the laws of what's kosher, the laws of the Sabbath, and some of them were experts in civil law, criminal law, and they judge these matters. That's their main preoccupation, judging, yes.
Yes, and no this joke or not, you are right, and you are right, and you are right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, you're also right.
And I'm right, always. Yes. But about why I asked this question, about Gil Zechariah, he is rabbi. So what is his role? To be teacher, or in this situation, to be judge?
I don't understand the question.
No, you say,
He was, the Talmud says he was wrong. What he did was wrong. He should have given a decision that this is what you do to this person, Bar Kamsa. You kill him because he is a threat to the lives of the Jewish people.
so he is judge.
He's a judge, yes. And that was his job. His job was to be a judge, among others. You don't have one rabbi judging, but apparently the other rabbis defer to him. He was like the senior rabbi there. So they're looking up to him for his advice, and he wouldn't give it. He wouldn't give any definitive ruling. You know, it's interesting, some commentaries add another point. When the Sanhedrin would meet and they would discuss a matter of law, of life and death situation, who would speak first? There's seniority there. The lowest member would speak first. The most junior member of the Sanhedrin would speak first. Why? Why not give the honor to the most senior member? Because there's a fear if the senior member says something, no one's going to want to disagree with him. So you always had the junior member first, and then you would have the others until the senior member would be the last one. So that way, everyone had freedom to decide things on their basis on their own understanding. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulos was the senior member, but he considered himself, because of his humility, the junior member, and he spoke first. But because he was really the senior member, nobody wanted to disagree with him. That's why it doesn't say that there are any rabbis who disagreed, because, Zechariah says it, we can't disagree. That was because of his humility. If he hadn't had that false humility or the misplaced humility, he would have been the last one, and there would have been other opinions voiced, and maybe that would have changed the whole outcome. So humility is a great virtue, but sometimes it's out of place. Yes?
A rabbi, then you could say it's the fault of all the rabbis, because
Blame the rabbis, yes.
Nobody had the courage to speak up. Even if they thought he was wrong, they would just let it go.
Okay, you could say by extension, they were all passive, it seems, and they allowed his non-opinion or non-decision prevail. That's true. You know, the Talmud asked the question, why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the other rabbi, who was given an opportunity by Vespasian to grant him whatever he asked for, why wouldn't he ask for Jerusalem, which was the main prize? So the Talmud gives two answers. One answer is he knew he wouldn't get that. Even though Vespasian says you could ask for anything, he's not going to give him the prize. The Romans were there for years, spending how much, I don't know how many resources for tens of thousands of Roman soldiers on Israeli land for 2 years, and now they're trying to get to Jerusalem, and now they're going to say, okay, we're going to call it off. So he knew he wouldn't get that. That's why he didn't ask for it. The other answer the Talmud gives is, and he quotes a biblical verse, that sometimes God causes wise people to be unwise. That sometimes the smartest people, if God wants the outcome to be a certain way, he'll make even the smartest people do dumb things. That means that he should have asked for Jerusalem, but God was ready to have the Jerusalem destroyed, so he made sure that he would not give the right answer. So that's the same thing could be applied to all those rabbis there who didn't speak up, or if they did speak up, they didn't assert themselves. That was part of the plan that God had that would lead to the destruction of the temple. And it was a mistake on their part, yes. And we have to learn from their mistakes that when you have a leadership position, you cannot just say, I'm nobody, who am I? Unless you really are a nobody. There are some leaders who are real nobodies. Yes.
So the destruction of Jerusalem was part of God's plan.
Yes.
So then everybody in this story are acting according to what God wanted them to do
Okay.
in order to facilitate God's plan.
Good question. The question was, if this was God's plan, then all these people are doing God's bidding. The same thing you could say about someone who kills someone. It was God's will that that person should die, but you have no right to carry out God's bidding. If God wants that person dead, there are many ways they can die. They don't have to die by your gun. So if you choose to do evil, you get blamed for it, regardless of what the outcome was supposed to be. The outcome is in God. That's for God to know what the outcome has to be. We know we have laws that we go by. We can't do things that are wrong, even if the ultimate outcome, whatever the outcome will be, it was ordained by God. But the choice to do something evil doesn't rest with us. We have no right to choose evil. Yes.
So then, can you say that God is the author of a novel, and God has written a novel, and the results are God's results? How you play your part
Is up to you.
do is your responsibility. The outcome is not.
Right,
The outcome is
that's exactly what I
God's.
was saying, that the outcome of this novel that God is writing is already there. It's in the novel, but what part we have is up to our choices. And that's why we are held accountable for every choice we make, good or bad. We can't say, well, God knows what we're going to do, and God ordained it ahead of time, but he didn't ordain that you should be the one or I should be the one to do it. That's why I get full credit when I do the right thing and a full blame when I do the wrong thing. Yes.
But sometimes doesn't God change his mind about the outcome of the novel? Like, haven't there been prophets throughout time who have argued with God?
Right.
Changed God's mind. So you don't.
Okay, even when a prophet says something terrible is going to happen, we can change that. Prayer, repentance can change the outcome that was ordained, and therefore you could change the outcome. On the other hand, if the prophet says something good is going to happen, that outcome cannot be changed. That's one of the proofs you can prove a false prophet. There's a story in the Bible with Jeremiah. He was predicting the temple will be destroyed, the first temple. There was another prophet, Hananiah, who was saying, no, it's not going to be destroyed, and in fact, whatever people were already exiled, they're going to be brought back. Everything is going to be hunky-dory, although the words hunky-dory are not in the text. And Jeremiah says to him, you know what, I can't prove that I'm giving a true prophecy, because even though I'm prophesying doom, it could change. If people shape up, it will change. But your prophecy can be tested. You're prophesying that things will be good. If they don't turn out that way, that proves that you're a false prophet. And indeed, it did prove that he was a false prophet.
So basically, the last chapter is really not written he has a first draft, but it can be modified.
Yes, it could be modified. That's the power of prayer to change the decree. That's why Moses, soon going to be reading about this, was praying and praying, even though God decreed that you're going to not enter the promised land. God tells you unequivocally, you're not going in. And Moses keeps on praying and says, God, I want to go in. Please let me in. And until God says, don't talk to me about this anymore. Once God gave him a commandment not to talk about it, okay, that's it. I'm commanded not to talk about it. But the decree itself didn't mean that he can't change it. So if God tells a person, you are going to die, or there's an actual story with the king Hezekiah. And what?
I said that's 100% true.
Oh, thank you. Hezekiah and Isaiah. Isaiah comes to Hezekiah. I don't know why they have to anglicize his name. Cheskiyahu is his name. And says to him, you're going to die. And Heschel says, why? Because you don't want to get married. So he says, I know. The reason I don't want to get married because I know prophetically that my child is going to be evil. He says, that's not your business. That's God's business. He says, okay, I'll get married. Let me marry your sister. And he says, too late. The decree was given. And Cheskiyahu tells the prophet, you can get out of here. I have a tradition from my ancestor, probably King David, that even if there's a sharp sword hovering over your neck, going in that downward direction, don't refrain from praying for mercy. As long as you're still alive, decrees can be altered, can be changed. It's not set in stone. It could be changed if it's a negative decree. But if God tells Moses, I'm giving you a commandment not to talk to me about this anymore, Moses had no choice. He had to follow God's commandment.
That's in Pinchas, right?
No, that's in verse Chanan. It's going to be
Next week.
a week after, 2 weeks.
Pinchas was just a command, was a command.
Well, God tells him in Pinchas that he's not going to go into the promised land. God,
Right, but that wasn't the ultimate.
no, that was a decree. A decree is a decree, and you could fight it. And he did fight it, and he didn't prevail. Okay, so the bottom line is that the way to get the temple rebuilt is to reverse the cause, and the root cause is senseless hatred. And senseless hatred is based on the way we don't see the real essence of who we're dealing with. If we see their true essence, their divine essence, the hatred would disappear. We look at the person superficially. Okay. Any questions on Zoom? I always forget about the Zoomites.
I have one more question.
Yeah, one more question.
What if the true essence of the person is evil?
There are some people like that. Eichmann, for example, is those people who have been so identified with evil that it permeates to their very core, and whatever spark of divinity they have in them is so covered up that it's impossible to liberate. They have to be destroyed.
But Rabbi, you need evil in a story. In God's creation, evil is necessary. So God, along these lines, has created some individuals. In order for the good to shine, he's made some of these people are evil. And it helps, it's something that can bring out the good in others.
You're talking about why evil exists, that evil helps bring out the good. Yes, there's a reason for evil to exist, but it doesn't mean we identify with evil, or we support it, and we respect it. We fight evil.
Right, but what I'm saying is those individuals who are evil, in some certain way, they deserve your compassion, because God has made us the novel. He has made what it is. someone has to do it. Someone has to play God's part that he wants. Why don't those people deserve a certain degree of compassion? As paradoxical as that may seem.
I'm not sure. You should always have compassion for people who are evil. If there's some hope, we're not talking about the Eichmann Hitler kind of evil, but we're talking about the average evil that exists in this world. You should have compassion for their soul that is in prison. It says one of the things that we do when we pray to God is we ask God for mercy. What's the mercy for what? Yeah, if you're in a bad physical shape and you're very ill and you're very poor, you need mercy. But if you're just a regular person and no real problems, what's the mercy for? The answer is the mercy is for your soul that's in a prison, that it can't express itself fully. So obviously, if you're an evil person who's not going to pray for his own soul, we can pray for their soul, that their soul should manifest itself, in which case they might not be evil anymore. And there's a question here. I don't know if I can understand it. Is it not the case that senselessly loving senseless hatred will only invite that senseless hatred into one's life so it can implement its hateful intentions? Obviously, when you have senseless love, it doesn't mean let's say someone is really evil and you have to have senseless love for them. It doesn't mean you should compliment them and just flatter them and say, well, you're really such wonderful people. No, that's flattery. That's false flattery, and that's a vice, not a virtue. If you really care for an evil person and you want to show them love, you will use tough love. You praise them, of course, for the good that they have, but you have to really fight their evil. That's the sign that you really love them.
Yeah, but many parents, okay, don't see the evil or the improper actions of their children. They love them because of their children, and it's a pure, unadulterated...
Yes, but at the same time, they try to work on changing their bad behavior.
Many don't.
That's because we're not doing our
No,
job.
I mean, there's a warmth that you see in a mother's love for a child that they can do no wrong.
And that's how we should view everyone, that you see the good in them. But if you have authority over them, you have influence over them, you have to use it to try to change them. If you see someone who has a bad ingrained habit, you still love them and embrace them and accept them, but you try to get them out of their habit, if you really care for them. Okay, but people don't do that. I know. So if this person asks, eye for an eye, hatred for hatred, no? Did I sing it right? If someone hates you, hate them back. An eye for an eye. An eye for an eye is a judicial thing, which doesn't really literally mean eye for an eye. It means pay the compensation for the eye. But even that is something for the judge to give. We're not judges. We have to respond to hatred. And I'm not talking about genocidal hatred. I'm not talking about the Yasser Arafats of the world. You don't have to be Eichmann or Hitler to be patently evil. The Hamas, the Hezbollah, these are genocidal people who want the destruction of all Jews, and they say that openly. That's pure evil. I don't have to, I hate them with the same degree of hatred that they have for me. Hate them as a group, as an ideology. But if I still think there's a chance of changing them, I can't show them this hatred. I have to show them that I see the good in them. And there are some cases where some of these people turn around and they change their attitude. But again, I'm not in the position to judge, to render judgment against people. And that's the difference between the punishments of the Torah and the way we have to behave. If you're the judge and you have to punish someone for committing a crime, you can't say, well, love will be the best way to deal with a criminal. No, sometimes you have to punish them. especially if the Torah mandates it. Okay, next week, again at 11 o'clock, we'll be doing the 15th of Av. Next week is Tisha B'Av. We won't have a class. The week after, God willing.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you.
and
You too,
everybody.
everyone.
In your example, okay, I didn't want to bring it up because I knew it was an example, but you're saying that if you saw somebody running after somebody with a sword or a knife,